Did the remake have a longer exclusivity date? 6 months. Originally, it actually said 1 year on it, which was technically true because it did come out in April 10th, 2020, and then it was February 2021 is when they revealed the Yuffie DLC and that it was coming in June. So that was about a year, couple months after that, right? Because it was post like PlayStation 5 launch and stuff, and they redid the lighting and they added DLC, Yuffie's individual story mission, all that stuff. So yeah, somebody recommended to check out this Anime News Network article interviewing Hamaguchi, Kitase, and Teruki Endo, which came out, well, today. Damn. Creating a video game classic with 7 rebirths, Hamaguchi, Kitase, and Endo. What balancing changes or challenges did you face when expanding the world and playable characters from remake to rebirth? So the number of characters significantly increases with the 2 titles, so balance adjustments were necessary to try to nerf my Aga spells, but they made it even crazier technically. With Rebirth, a new system was added and synergy ability with skills in terms of battle. This had to be done considering the existing attributes of the characters and then readjusting based on those to create these abilities and skills. I thought it was really cool that we didn't have to actively go through the tree and do the weapons and then do the abilities. That would have been too much. So they kind of like simplified it and let the progression elements, where as you get more manuscripts, it's unlocking more materia slots for you automatically. You don't have to actively go into the upgrade weapons and then actively click on, hey, give me another materia slot. It does it for you. I thought that was really cool to kind of like streamline the elements of it. And synergy inclusion is godlike, man. It's one of the best things that they could have done, and it's going to get better. There's no way they don't do triples. Final Fantasy is a series that's very aware of the numbers and the number scheme. Like with 7, it's things in 7s, you know, lucky 7s and whatnot. So I feel like with part 2, synergy between 2 teammates, part 3, synergy between 3 teammates, it only makes sense, and I think that's something that we can definitely expect. So, and plus at the very end of the game, we technically do see a triple tech between Barret, Cloud, and Tifa, which is pretty badass. I love that scene. What was the impetus for automating the weapon skill system as opposed to how it was used in Remake? Well, look at that. We talked about that, automating it. Looking into Remake, the growth mechanics were fewer in terms of the player choosing passive skills for the characters and such, but then in Rebirth, this was increased, including the synergy mechanic, as we touched on, as well as the affinity between characters impacting their abilities and skills as part of the overall growth mechanics. I have a question for Kitase-san as well. With reports that the remake game sales underperformed, are there plans to change the console exclusivity window for the next installment of 7 Remake Trilogy? Regarding the strategy of the console release, there's sort of nothing we can comment on regarding that, but overall, we are looking forward to players enjoying and playing this title, so we wish for that to happen. Put it out on more platforms, man. Straight up, I want the next title to release on PC. They're stuck in an exclusivity thing with Sony, and I hope at the very minimum Sony can find it within their hearts to just fucking drop this shit on PC, man. Endo-san said that he wanted to get the player even more freedom in the 3rd installment. Can you share some of the ideas that the staff is implementing this into part 3? I'm unable to comment on details of that at the moment. I believe that instead of the developers or creators dictating how players should be playing along a pre-planned path, so to speak, it's better to allow more freedom and the user's choice to be able to play in their own way that they wish to. Yes. 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 This is the guy that made Monster Hunter World, bro. Well, naturally, there are challenges to actually realizing that. And when you go into making that a reality, my thoughts are also that the Final Fantasy series to continue to reinvent itself, to revitalize itself, and stay fresh to our players. This type of constant evolution is necessary in terms of the battle elements as well. So those are the underlying thoughts I had while making that comment. You can't go wrong with that. Rebirth definitely opened up so many elements, from minimizing how much you have to really manage your materia, as far as like reducing some of them and making them passives or embedded, baked into the character kit. Best decision ever. They need to do more of that, I think, going forward. Like, I think ATB assist can be a passive skill or something, please, that everybody has an opportunity to equip or unequip. There are some reasons why those materia slots exist. I would just like to have a little bit more flexibility and freedom with actual materia versus materia that affects the way skills or ATBs influence. You know what I mean? And I kind of like it to an extent, because it does make your playstyle have to be a certain way to make it proc or like to go for certain things to kind of extend the gameplay. And it's great. But Going forward, we're going to get more materia slots, more materia, time or mimic materia, and like quadra magic finally, you know, stuff like that. It'll be really cool to finally get to create some wild builds, because there was always the theory that the MP absorb and HP absorb build, you could use it in remake. You couldn't do too much with it because of the limiting aspects of having to require other materia in order to make certain things proc, right? Like first strike is a necessity. It's always going to take up a slot on your main magic dealers and stuff and people that set up the battlefield. So MP absorb and linking and pairing all those links between the blue and the green materia, it can be kind of difficult to do that with such a limited sense. And so that's why I was glad that they gave us more materia slots in Rebirth, but ultimately we got to experience that theory of a build in remake finally in Rebirth and see it fully realized, if that makes sense. So I hope going forward in part 3 we can go even crazier with that, which it sounds like they kind of want to, because they're talking about freedom and all that stuff, so one can only hope, right? It's mentioned that the new trilogy was an opportunity to expand on the characters' backstories and add scenes and details. What new scenes in 7 Remake and Rebirth are you most excited to incorporate into the games? Hamaguchi says, in terms of something that was sort of new in Rebirth compared to the original that wasn't the original, we have the Gold Saucer date that everyone's familiar with. And this time we increased the variety of dates you can go on in terms of who you can go on a date with. I think that was a really good idea, especially the neutral one, where you go on a date with Kate Sith, Vincent, and Sid, and it's just like hanging out with your friends when you're all 40 years old and it's late as hell and people are struggling to stay awake. I believe we were able to answer the players' wants in terms of increasing that variety in the special event. The characters in 7 are so beloved by its fans, and so in that way, increasing the number of characters that you can go on a date with, as well as the actual contents of the date, was something that I think was very positively received. Terugi Endo, my favorite scene in Rebirth is the one with Dyne and Barrett. The moment also exists in the original, but in Rebirth, it's portrayed in so much more detail to a point where we really see the characters' facial expressions. It's very dramatic, heartfelt moment. It really gives me a new perspective on everything that happens in the scene. Even though I've done playtests, like the run-throughs of the game so many times, this is the one scene that I never skip. It's special to me. John Eric Bentley did a fucking phenomenal job in that scene, and you really feel the emotions and the impacts of it, right? The acting within it is done phenomenally well. The direction of the scene, though, I feel like certain things in the OG were done a little bit better after getting more perspective and seeing other people's takes on it and going, yeah, okay, that makes a lot more sense. That's actually way more deeper. Like Turquoise Hammer, he does a lot of the translations in general, like Ultimania stuff. He brought up a point of the Dyne scene in the OG and how and it's such a subtle thing. If you go back and you look at where Dyne is like hanging out and the party walks up to him, there's 2 graves there. One for Eleanor and another one for Marlene, which is wild. I don't know why when I played that game, I didn't realize that little mound and the little headstone, that's actually a grave for Marlene that Dyne made, because he does say in that moment that Marlene's dead, and then Barrett tries to reason with him and tell him, like, no, Marlene's alive. You have to come back with me and see her. And then Dyne goes through this whole turmoil and commits suicide. And it's kind of at peace with himself, right? In Rebirth, it's like Shinra. Shinra does it. Shinra takes away again and does what they do. And it kind of doesn't feel as dark. And it's kind of in the OG game, it was whoa, that was intense. And obviously for probably ratings and reasons between that, they probably changed a few things and made some changes with that. But I think the OG definitely hits you when you realize the scope of the scene and what's happening within it and how it all unfolds. In the original, he also says he would kill her so that she could be with her mother. It's wild. Yeah. I get they had to tone some things down, but it's just something that other people have mentioned that I've noticed. And then now I having to sit there and think about it. Maybe it could have been done differently, I think. But overall, it's still a great scene. It's still very emotional. It still hits you. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the acting was phenomenal in it, but it's just there's certain elements with the direction of the scene, you know? Hidekazu Miyake mentioned that Cloud's big dance number in Remake was the most ambitious and challenging. Was Aerith's performance of No Promises to Keep similarly difficult to realize? Is there another cinematic sequence in Rebirth that takes the crown for the greatest challenge? So actually, Hamaguchi says, the most difficult scene in Rebirth, I believe, was Rufus's inauguration parade. Oh shit, yeah, there's so many different moving pieces to that, literally. I'll go into why. First, we had to look for a person that understands parade formations. Someone with experience that was very hard to find. Then we had to find actors who could perform these sequences. So with both of these requirements, we had to look and have all of them before we started the motion capture. It took a while to find these moving pieces. An interesting story I like to share is in that scene, all the soldiers, including Cloud, have guns in their hands when they're doing the parade. To mimic this, we created real gun models for all the actors to hold while doing the sequence. But then what happened is the gun models were made so heavy and it was impossible to move. Twirling them around and doing all those motions, it became a problem. So in the end, even though they made these models, they ended up using umbrellas. That's that's kind of funny. That's a really fun bit of trivia. See, I like Hamaguchi, bro. He shares things that kind of like make you appreciate their development process of how they go about things with the game. Do you know approximately how many motion capture actors they needed to get for that scene, since the parade is usually so many people? We had around 30 to 40 soldiers in the parade within the game. We can't fit all those people, so we had a group of 6 people that we would film in various areas doing the routine, and then we'd put all those together through CG. I figured as much. I thought it was going to be maybe 2 or 3 people, but 6 people makes sense. Fans have been trying to decode secrets of the timeline based on the various variations of Stamp, the Shinra duck. Can you confirm if there's anything more to these different breeds? Hamaguchi says, so when a player goes through playing Remake and Rebirth, it does come to a point where one can have many conjectures about what this might mean. The reason we included the different stamps was to signal the different layers and different timelines within this world. So that acts as a mark for the player to see and say, okay, what is that? So these are shown in each timeline. We would see a stamp, like on a bag of sweets, or a doll in a gift shop. They put it in as little markers or Easter eggs. Okay. It's obvious that the stamps are put in place so people are able to tell which world is being represented at various points of the game. Especially towards the end, it's very, very apparent as they're alternating between the things that are going on between Zack and Biggs and showcasing all the different outcomes of that specific world. And while this did play a major point in Remake and then Rebirth, I don't think it necessarily will be a big focus in Part 3, because I'm on the side that actually believes that at the very end of the game, spoiler alert by the way, at the very end of the game, when we see Zack sitting in the church by himself, during this moment, they don't show us at all any stamps whatsoever. They kind of stop going with that. And with this obviously being a thing that they did to showcase to us what world is particularly being shown, I think that ultimately the timelines or worlds have merged and there is one single world as of right now, and that Zack is officially back and he is existing within the same world, let's say Beagle for right now, that Cloud and them are in. And it's not necessarily a Beagle world anymore. All of them has combined, or there just isn't any variations. We're gonna have to wait and see, but I think that is the case for Part 3, because he's obviously still around and very well could meet up with the party at the Northern Crater. What's the wildest fan theory you've seen in the trilogy so far? Oh, this was spoiled for me on Twitter. After the panel yesterday, we were chatting with the voice actors over dinner and this exact topic came up. Funnily enough, we're talking about Chadley, and we're talking about how like some people think that he's actually evil and will turn out to be the last boss in the final title. We were cracking up about that. Part of me feels like, knowing this, the devs are going to play a prank on the players and kind of like maybe reference it or make it a funny Easter egg of like evil Chadley or something like that. I feel like that might be a thing we could see in Part 3. Yoshinori Kitase says, I don't know if this is something unexpected or anything, but I guess there's not really a specific thing or theory that I can comment on right now. But we do hear a lot of players' different conjectures saying, oh, how much will this story change from the original? And I do want to comment that I don't think that's how it will be. Oh, Kitase. We've always kept the original in mind, and I don't think it's going to be a storyline that will betray the fans of the OG game, but also at the same time, it's been 27 years since the release of the OG game. These are the things that we feel that we can only do now in the remake project that can bring new happiness, a new sort of feeling of satisfaction to the players playing this game now, 27 years later. What will this entail exactly is something that we hope players will experience soon. Well, Kitase kind of just brought that up himself because there was a theory question and he's like, there's no theory I can actually comment on right now, but I do hear about a lot of things of what players are saying about how this will change from the original. He always takes the extra liberty to talk about that. Kitase-san, are there any plans to produce a physical version of Queen's Blood? We've been asked this a lot, and it's in high demand. So when new hires come to Square Enix to get people excited, they created their own DIY real physical version of Queen's Blood. I saw this before. There's only one in the world. Unfortunately, we cannot share this information of a physical version of the game yet, but this in-studio version does exist, and it's not just cards, but they made like a stage and shared a picture of this backdrop. So that they made using the 3D modeling. I don't know why every time I see the Queen's Blood, like castle and stuff in the background, and even right here, it always makes me think of the play in Alexandria and FF9 and how it looks with the ship attached to it. Which mini games were the most challenging to implement and were the favorite games among the staff? Will there be new mini games to look forward to in the next installment? Hamaguchi says, as to which one was the most challenging to make, I would say Queen's Blood. Within the various mini games included in Rebirth, there are some where a player might do once or a few times, but then there are ones like Queen's Blood where they could play over and over and over again. I knew that we had to put time and effort into creating something that would be satisfying to play in that way. While it was challenging to work on this, I think hearing very positive feedback from the players, as you said, it was us succeeding in making this. And for ones that were the staff's favorites, besides Queen's Blood, I think Chocobo Racing was one. Yeah, Chocobo Racing feels way too good. It feels get and execute within Mario Kart, and it's done really well. I think the control scheme is good. I like accelerating with the X button and then using R2 to drift and stuff. I think that feels really, really good for that type of style, and it plays great. I do wish the AI was a little bit more tougher. Some of even the later game AIs, even though they might be crazy in the first like 2 laps, the 3rd lap, I feel like they always take a break. So you can just jump into it. It's very tactile, and a lot of the devs are enjoying it. In terms of Rebirth, we aim to provide a mini-game experience where this would be varieties of it, where players can find their own favorite. I think we succeeded in doing that for Rebirth, but we don't look to do exactly the same thing going forward in the next title. We want to continue offering this very fresh experience. So as opposed to just increasing the number of mini-games available, our focus is to provide mini-games like Queen's Blood or Chocobo Racing, where a player would want to come back and play over and over again throughout the course of the game, and probably sprinkle a couple here and there, but it won't be such a big focus in the next title. So there are a lot of people that didn't like the mini-games. You got your wish. There's a lot of people that didn't like any of the mini games, which is shocking to me. Some people felt like they were forced to participate in a lot of them, man. And it's like, you know, I enjoyed them. I had a lot of fun with them. The only one I didn't really like was Gears and Gambits. When I finally got the game and understood it, took about like 3 matches to really understand it. I just was like, okay, I get it. I see why it is the way that it is, but I wanted to move on from. Which boss battle mechanic was the most satisfying to pull off and which was the most challenging? Endo says, I love all the bosses, so it's hard to choose, but if I were to pick one, it'd be the Galleon Beast. That one was a surprise. I didn't think we were going to fight Vincent. With Vincent, I think this was very unique in that it was a boss battle that required players to almost switch or flow between action-based and then strategy-based battle. You go into these with these approaches and have to maneuver between them. I think this is satisfying. We were successful in implementing this type of battle. It kind of messed up my perception though, because going forward, will Vincent be that big in Galleon Beast and his other like limit breaks? Will we be able to control them? Is it just going to be a cutscene? I have so many questions. The Zolan battle took more time to work on because this is a boss also present in the original. It's in the minds of players and has quite of a presence. But it also comes up in the very early stages of the game for Rebirth, so I was conscious in striking this balance between it not being so hard that the player finds it extremely challenging to defeat this boss, but at the same time making it hard enough so that it's impactful and puts up a fight. I kind of wish there was more elements of it pertaining towards the OG where like you can kind of run away from it and come back to it or escape it, you know? But obviously they don't want to put so much time and effort into something, so much money into something that people could just miss or skip, which is why characters aren't missable anymore. I'm so disappointed that we couldn't get beta as a fucking enemy skill. That's my favorite thing in FF7 to do, right? You got to get the elemental materia. You got to have sadness. You got to put your character in the fucking back row and get that enemy skill, man. I was still in denial. I was like, no, there's no way we're going to be able to get it. No, enemy skills are done through the fucking VR thing. That was disappointing. I think that enemy skills should be done like how it is in Remake. You got to get hit. Get hit by it, you learn it. I think that is something that they should not mess with, and that isn't tied to the VR. In the OG game, if you got hit by it once, you unlocked it immediately. In Remake, it was sometimes you got to get hit by it twice or 3 times max. I don't think it's more than 4. So maybe they were like, oh, we don't want to make people do that. Self-destruct is a bitch sometimes, but like, hey, man, yeah, like use manipulation. Use the enemy to hit you with the enemy skill. The end of Rebirth remakes one of the most famous cutscenes in video game history for new audiences. Some reactions post-game included confusion over how to interpret the new development of this scene. What reaction was the staff hoping to garner from players, and what message did you want? Or do you have a comment for players who feel this new version of events is confusing or unsatisfying? Amaguchi says, I think that's a very good question. So when I play tested the game and went through countless numbers of times, I thought the players were going to play Rebirth and going to go through various perspectives and have different thoughts about the ending. We'd already announced from the beginning that this remake series would be a trilogy, so when we considered releasing 3 titles, of course there will be some time between releasing 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3. I also discussed how we want the community to interact with while we're waiting for that next installment. They've been watching our videos for sure. And Baby Seals, Sleep Easies. They probably watch that podcast as well. Kitase-san and I were also discussing this, but we thought it's very enjoyable for the community to have something very worthy of an intense discussion, like what's really going on here. That's something that we wanted and expected going into creating the scene. In terms of the experience we anticipated and also desired, I think we are satisfied in that there are both negative and positive reactions to this scene. The negatives being that they took the water burial scene, removed that from this game, and put that in part 3, making you feel empty as a player, expecting that and not seeing that. It's like another way to kind of like, yes, feel negatively about it, but also get affected strongly by it, if that makes any sense. It's a gamble. Max says it too. We're gonna have to see if that pays off. They have a plan. I hope they don't like look at our theory videos and things that we say and change things depending on like fan feedback. I know they've alluded to doing that with certain things, but I hope that they just go with their gut. BltzZ says, also to add to this and offer an alternate perspective when discussing the scenario with Nomura and Nojima, we're also talking about how in the original, it's showing Cloud's perspective, this feeling of immense loss, losing someone that you love and having this hole in your heart. When considering how to depict this in Remake series, we also thought about not only expressing this loss of someone who means so much to you, but also the sense of a person experiencing loss and being unable to force yourself to forget this person and almost like an inability to accept it. Struggling with the possibility of losing someone. So that was something that we wanted to show in Rebirth. More so the aspect of how it affects Cloud in the negative sense that he's unable to come to grips with it and he's actually going insane, but doesn't realize it. But everybody else does, and even Tifa is like alarmed by it. Regarding the original, its first disc ends with that huge loss, and I recall some people not even wanting to continue playing and changing over to disc 2 because they didn't want to play anymore because of that. It's a huge feeling of loss and despair, but I do think there's a synchronization of feelings between the players and Cloud, struggling with how do I deal with this feeling? The feeling of loss of how a person struggled to take on what was happening. We imagine the players of Rebirth would also have that synchronous feeling. I understand what BltzZ means, but he's got to understand when you're telling a story, that feeling of loss and despair, yes, those people didn't finish or didn't want to continue playing the game. Yes, because it impacted them and the story actually gave them a very emotional response. Shout out to Chadley. I think that that's great storytelling. It's a real story where death is finite. And that you got to deal with it, just like in real life. Those are some of the best elements, I think, when it comes to like storytelling to be able to execute and hit. It's a big reason why there's a lot of people that when it comes to when it comes to like stories like Dragon Ball is not revered as a friggin' amazing storytelling art, because if somebody dies in Dragon Ball, it's no big deal. They're coming back with the Dragon Balls. You can wish them back. It's kind of like, oh, you just died. All right, no worries. I don't feel anything. I don't feel any sense of loss. And I think that's a really important thing that I hope that, well, BltzZ it's not something that he needs to learn. I'm not saying that. I just wish more games realized that and kind of took those risks. Like a major one was like The Last of Us 2. I feel like it was done incredibly early in the game, to the point where it was just like it pissed people off. But if it was done a little later, maybe it would have been received a little bit better. But also with them doing it in that way, it kind of like you don't expect it. It catches you off guard and you're like vulnerable about it, and it really affects you, and you can see that. That's why the public had such a visceral and wild reaction to what happened in that game. But I like that. I like that in storytelling. There's some players that are in real denial over Aerith's death. You thinking that we'll get to see Aerith's death in full in the water burial during the second Forgotten Capital trip in part 3. I think so. Or maybe sooner than that. Maybe Sephiroth manipulates it when he's breaking Cloud's mind, and we see a warped version or a warped perception of that. And then we see the true events later on. I think that'd be kind of cool. Always enjoy seeing the devs talk about things coming to the series, their progress on part 3. Feels like it's 2020 and 2021 all over again, where we're just like getting little bits and pieces after the game just came out, and we're talking about it. And it's always going to be a fun thing to make videos on and stream and chat about, you know, and I always look forward to doing that with you guys. And I'm glad that you guys are still here after so long, after so many years of us doing this. We're still on this train, and there's no getting off of it, and it's only going to get crazier going forward, man. You know, I had a set expectation when it came to Rebirth on what it might be like, as far as not being an open world game or like a game that had zones, but more so an on-rails experience where chapter to chapter takes you through towns and stuff. But no, they went ahead and they surprised me 10 times over, giving us that much freedom. I wasn't expecting that much freedom, being able to walk around and do all that. And then when we got the tiny Bronco in the water and took it around in that way, that shit was crazy. As far as water goes, you can take the Tiny Bronco anywhere. You can go from continent to continent, and I did not expect that because in the OG game, Tiny Bronco was just made to go through shallow water. In this one, they said to hell with that. You can go through anywhere. I think for part 3, I can't even imagine. Like, my mind is like thinking, okay, one thing, and then I'm like, you know, I thought this before, but then they went ahead and they surprised me and they went even bigger. Skydiving off of the high wind or some shit, you know, like, who knows what they're gonna do. But I know that after going from remake to rebirth and seeing what they did, I'm no longer worried. I'm no longer stressed, because a lot of times I was like, oh my God, what if they fuck this up? What if they fuck this up? But they didn't. They nailed it. They did the exact opposite. They nailed it completely. Did a fantastic job. Truly believe that part 3 is just going to go even crazier. And even if we sit here, even if like me, Max, Baby Seal, NSP, and Sleep Easy sit here and we think about all the craziest shit that they could do in part 3, they would go even further and do stuff that we didn't even conceptualize. Couldn't even think that they would go ahead and do that. And that's the energy I love that the devs are taking with this. So it's got me very excited for part 3. And this journey going from Rebirth to whatever part 3 is going to be. So I'm glad that you guys are here and we're doing it together again.